Hello, hello. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Liz Granite, and I'm the events co chair for One Book, One New Orleans. And tonight is a very special night. We get to kick off our 2022 programming for this year's selection, I Feel to Believe, by journalist Jarvis DeBerry. For those of you who are joining a One Book, One New Orleans event for the first time, let me tell you a little bit about what we do. One Book, One New Orleans selects one book each year, and we encourage everybody in the city to read that same book at that same time with the intention that we're going to grow stronger as a community through a shared reading experience. And in fulfilling our mission, we have to recognize that the functional literacy rate among adults in our city is approximately 27%. So we do extra layers of outreach to make sure that when we say we're One Book, One New Orleans, we truly mean it. We do this by developing a curriculum around each year's book selection, and we get the book into adult education programs in Orleans Parish. In addition, we also get it into both adult and juvenile prisons, and we get the book into the ears of the blind and print disabled thanks to a partnership with WRBH Reading Radio for the Blind. Finally, for those who love to read yet don't have the resources to purchase books, we remove that barrier by making sure that every branch of the New Orleans Public Library has a copy. So let's get this party started. I'm going to turn it over to our executive director, Dr. Megan Holt.
Thank you so much, Liz, for introducing our mission to those who might not be familiar with it. As Liz said, we give our selected book every year, which this year is I Feel to Believe by journalist Jarvis Debary, free of charge to many, many different groups in our community, along with a curriculum. We also hold several free family-friendly events throughout the year inspired by the book, the first of which is tonight. And I would like to thank the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities and the Arts Council of New Orleans for making a lot of our work in 2022 possible. Thank you so much. So, I would also like to thank the publisher of I Feel to Believe and our co-presenter this evening, University of New Orleans Press. University of New Orleans Press is proud of the books they publish and especially proud to be the publishing partner of Runagate Press, with whom they collaborated to bring out I Feel to Believe. And we are so excited to have with us tonight not only Jarvis DeBerry, but also the co-founders of Runagate Press. So without further ado, I will bring them up in alphabetical order. First up, we have Jarvis DeBerry, veteran Louisiana journalist and the author of I Feel to Believe. He recently joined MSNBC.com as opinions editor. His previous roles include founding editor of the Louisiana Illuminator and deputy opinions editor, columnist, and editorial writer for the Times-Picayune, and the columns he wrote there make up this book. He was on the team of journalists awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service for its coverage of Hurricane Katrina and the flood that followed. His columns have won awards from the New Orleans Press Club, the Louisiana-Mississippi Associated Press, and the National Association of Black Journalists. Welcome, Jarvis. Next up, we have Fayemi Robinson, a highly valued synergizer and principal of Compositions Consulting. Designer of Making Space, Mastering Time, a course in life design, and the developer of the Agency app for life design. She's a certified alignment coach, a licensed accountability coach, and a member of the International Coach Federation. Io is an Eco-Districts accredited professional who leads strategic multi-sector conversations and has contributed to local, national, and international programs. Within the African philosophy of Ifa, Io is a priest. She is the co-editor of Fertile Ground, Memories and Visions, author of the poetry collection Spherical Women, and co-founder of Runagate Press, specializing in titles that promulgate New Orleans culture and African heritage cultures worldwide. And last but certainly not least, a man whose short bio does not reflect his accomplishments at all, Kalamu Yasalam. New Orleans editor, writer, filmmaker, and educator Kalamu Yasalam is the founder of the Neo Griot Workshop, a Black writers' workshop focusing on text, recordings, and videos. He's co-founder with Fayemi Robinson of Runagate Press. His latest books are The Magic of Juju, A History of the Black Arts Movement, New Orleans Griot, The Tom Dent Reader, which was the One Book, One New Orleans 2020 selection, Be About Beauty, Cosmic Deputy, and I Am New Orleans. Welcome, Kalamu Yasalam.
Thank you.
And without further ado, I'm going to get out of here and turn it over to the three of you. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, as the youngest member of this esteemed trio, and for those who are looking at their screens and saying, he doesn't look like the youngest one. Let us just say I'm back. And we are here to celebrate a person who was a member of our workshop back in the day, as the saying goes. But the reason we're celebrating him is not because he's from back in the day, but because the work he did is memorialized in a book that is really captures some of the difficult times that people experienced. And I'll start off with my favorite piece is Engine Blocks and Axles. And Io was there when Jarvis read Engine Blocks and Io and Axles, and we all laughed. I mean, we laughed and we laughed and we laughed. Jarvis, why did we laugh?
Why did you laugh, you said?
Yeah. Not just me, all of us.
Well, I think, because it's a story that you can tell, like so many blues songs, right? Like you can tell about a really bad situation with comedy and with some type of levity, even if it isn't particularly funny. And so for you viewers out there, the story that Kalamu is talking about happened during my first 6 months as a reporter in New Orleans. About 10 or 11 o'clock, there was a call on the scanner. There's been a shooting at LaBeouf Court, which happens to be where the Fisher Housing Project was. And so I go over and get there just as someone is being wheeled away after a shooting. But the I guess hilarious moments that Kalamu was describing is when I find myself crouched down behind a police car with a photographer who is a lot more excited about this scene than I am. And he looks over and says, I don't want to insult your intelligence, but engine blocks and tire axles, those are the things that stop a bullet. Don't crouch down behind the door. And I was like, stop a bullet? Like is this part of my job description that I'm supposed to be, crouched down behind something in case somebody fires a bullet? But what really, there are two things that really jumped out to me about that scene is the utter normality of police banging on doors, guns drawn, looking for a gunman, and people in the neighborhood going about their business as if nothing at all was out of order. And it was also a reminder of a very, very important journalism lesson I got. And Kalamu and I mentioned it, talk about it in the interview that's at the end of this book. Greg Freeman was a really beloved and celebrated Metro columnist at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And when I talked to him about taking a position in New Orleans before I did, and said that I was probably going to cover crime and I didn't know what to do, I didn't want to write things that could be seen as disparaging about Black people, he said, you tell the truth. You tell the truth. And so that scene, the engine blocks and tire axles, the truth was not just the shooting. The truth was also the people in the neighborhood. The truth was the way that the mothers interacted with one another. And so I'm glad that I had that particular instruction coming into New Orleans for the first time, to tell the truth and to keep my eyes open and my ears open to the things that were around me.
Tell us about the little girl.
Yeah, so the scene is, the photographer has just told me, engine blocks and tire axles, don't crouch down behind the door. There are, the Fisher Housing Project had, it was kind of shaped like you might see a motel, where you had kind of a row of doors on this level, then right above it, a row of doors on that level with kind of a concrete walk. And so on the top level, there are police physically pounding on the door, one holding a flashlight, others with guns drawn, banging on the door, demanding that the person exit. And on the ground level, there is a girl moving past me, 7 or 8 years old, on roller skates. And the dichotomy of that scene, right, where police banging and this child doing what children do, was really what jumped out at me about that scene. The like I said, the normality of it. And New Orleans at this very moment, I think, is having yet another one of those like incredibly violent days, weeks, months. So just one of those kind of outbursts of violence. And as much as people who live in other neighborhoods where the violence isn't as acute may feel like it's completely out of normal, the people in the neighborhoods themselves can't get so worked up, I would imagine, about every single outburst of violence, because how would they actually be able to make it? And so that scene still jumps out at me. It still makes me sad, but it also, at the same time, it made me see that people form community no matter the circumstances. And that was one of the situations where I saw people committed to being in community no matter the craziness and the violence around them.
Ayo, you were one of the founding members of, well, there were only two of us as the founding members of the No More Workshop. And I will never forget that you were one of the people who challenged me, because I recently received an invitation to do workshops at Southern University in New Orleans in the summertime for men. And you came up and said, what's up with that? Right? And I said, well, why don't you do something for all of us? I said, okay, all right, calm down. I'll do something. And that led to a partnership that lasted for 10 years. And during that partnership is when Jarvis journeyed down from Mississippi and took a job at the Times-Picayune. And unbeknownst to him, he had stepped in it. I mean, he really stepped in it. And Jarvis showed up one day at the workshop. He can talk about why he came to the workshop, but I'd like you to explain to people what this workshop was like, that we would receive people all the way from Mississippi and not question them or require them to fill out a form or anything.
You act like Keisha was from New Orleans.
No, Keisha.
You act Ayo was from New Orleans. Let me correct myself. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, Jarvis, I've given my name as Ayo Keisha, just because that's the truth of it all. So, but hats off to those founding members, Sadiq Kali, Nadir Lasana Bomani, Mawia Kyle Bomani. I don't remember, was Glenn already there? Because I think Glenn was in the workshop for men,
Right.
that you did at Suno. So Glenn,
Yeah.
so Glenn Joshua. If there's anyone I'm leaving out, I apologize. But certainly those people I remember being a part of the workshop that preceded NOMO, which was a Black writers workshop and was host to writers of color from around the world. I've seen some of our friends chiming in the chat, so it's good to see everybody and just stay connected over all these years. But for 10 years, the workshop met every Tuesday night, with the exception of Kwanzaa week and Mardi Gras. And that longevity birthed so much relationship building, so much development of voice, so much clarity around everyone's purpose for writing. And people have just continued to be tremendously productive writers or contributors in whatever way they chose to use the craft that we honed at workshop at Nomo Literary Society. And, you know, some of it is about editing, some of it is about telling your family's stories, some of it is about making political commentary, cultural criticism, as Jarvis has done in this collection. Some of it is just loads of fun and amazing poetry and scholarship. And I think the biggest thing was that we got accustomed to what it means to study, what it means to stand inside of a tradition and relate to your work as a part of tradition, what it means to value a whole thing. And what I mean by that is there was attention to what was on the page, but we didn't really read each other's work. We listened to each other's work. So when I say voice, I mean literary voice, but I literally mean
Yeah.
the sound of your voice.
Yeah.
You know, what you wanted people to feel.
Yeah.
When they read your work, you had the opportunity initially to create with the sound of your voice, and not just in workshop, but because the experience of creation wasn't complete until you'd had the opportunity to share the work in community. And I mean community in, you know, in an open sense, but I also literally mean community book center in New Orleans.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And not to cut you off, Io, but what you're saying was so valuable to the columns that comprise this book, because what you all did in the way that you responded to each other's work, you made us very, very conscious of how it sounded. You know, and so to this day, I still, for particular columns and particular work, read it out loud to see how it sounds for myself, because it could look really, really good on the page, but if I'm imagining someone reading it, like either at a newspaper or a computer screen or whatever the case may be, I want to at least kind of imagine how it sounds to that person when they're reading it. And I just want to say up front, for the record, that, you know, I came into Nomo thinking I was like really, you know, I was a really good writer. And I was, you know, I had a certain confidence and a pride about myself. And there was a real, I think if you come in with that kind of pride, you're not really open to craft, because you may think that you know a lot more than you do. And so for me, there was a bit of a humbling experience at first, but at the same time, there was this deep and abiding sense of wanting to get better. And at no point did I believe that anybody in this workshop had any other motivation for being there except the work and community. I should put those two together, but wanting the work to be better. And that was more beneficial and valuable than any type of MFA program or graduate school study program ever could have been. And I would argue way more intense than the ones I've heard people describe. I was just saying this a few minutes ago, how we would get there at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday evening and often, and I do mean often, leave after midnight. I see you shaking your head wearily almost at the memory of that.
Well, just remembering what it was like to be a young person who could pay attention from 6 o'clock until after midnight.
Yes. Yes.
See, they're laughing at me, and I don't feel the least bit shame because I was always older than they were, and
always.
Yes. And you know, sad to say, when we started working on the very first book with Runagate, I would work all day and then show up at the office to work and read through things. And by 10:30, I had to take a nap. And then I would wake up and Kalamu would still be reading stuff. No.
Tireless for sure.
Yes. So he's a special person in so many ways.
I think, Kalamu, is worth pointing out that was a really good motivation for all of us, is that you couldn't be outworked yourself, right? So it wasn't like we could say, oh, well, this is too much or this is hard, because you were always surrounded by the books. You always seemed to be at your desk. And again, for 10 years of hosting this workshop with no vacation, really. I mean, you were always there for 10 years of Tuesdays. I mean, that was just an incredible commitment. So it didn't give anybody else an excuse to slack up. It didn't say, oh, well, this is too much, because the dedication was there. And I think, in addition to all of the writers that you introduced us to, both like the writers themselves as people and the writing that they produced, there was also always this very strong example that you were setting just about dedication and the community that comes with this. And so these columns, the columns that I wrote for the Times-Picayune, would not have been nearly as, would not have had the depth. Whatever depth they had would not have been there without NOMO and the fact that I was meeting every single week for hours on end. And for a part of that, I have to tell people, I lived in Covington, Louisiana, when I joined NOMO Literary Society, which was, on a good day, 45-minute one-way trip into the city. And so I still made the commitment that on Tuesdays after work, I was going to take that 45-minute drive to New Orleans and then a 45-minute trip back to Covington just to participate in the workshop. Just how important it was to me.
Yeah, I want to say that the workshop, for those who are watching, two aspects. One, how the workshop was structured, and the second, people that attended the workshop as visitors and guests. It was structured as a three-part experience. The first part, I was fortunate to be working at various places that I had access to copy machines. And I would prepare each week a reading for the workshop members to deal with. The way we dealt with the readings, however, was not academic. I had copies for everybody that was attending, and we would pass around, and everybody had to read out loud a portion of it. We just go around the table and everybody read. And if we didn't have enough people to finish the piece, we just started back around. And so this process was a process of community building and a process that moved away from writing as academic, but part of a community, as part of a community. Secondly, we had guests, and you all have to talk about how that affected us. But I knew people from all over the country. Some people are well known. For instance, I wouldn't advertise nor let the workshop members know in advance who was coming. You just had to be there. And so you all showed up one day and Amiri Baraka was sitting there. And we had a long discussion with Amiri Baraka. Then my good friend, whom I saw just checked in a little while ago, Mahmoud Rahman out of California, was visiting New Orleans and visiting me. And I invited him over. And Mahmoud is from Bangladesh. And he had a whole different experience about writing that he shared with people. And so I would ask you all, Jarvis and Ayo, I would ask you all, what did you think about the way the workshop was structured? And were there any memorable experiences there?
Aya.
Wow. Well, the structure was generative. So, that process of studying together, reading together, would always lead to discussion, and that discussion would lead to ideas, and those ideas were a context against which you could write about or from whatever your perspective was. And the other thing about that structure is that it was not limited in genre. And so there was something there for every kind of writer. I saw a note, Marion Moore wrote a note a little while ago about leaving us at 2 a.m. And I was thinking, but she was writing all those long pieces. Who was she leaving? I don't think she was leaving anybody anywhere at 2 a.m.
And Ayo's response is just characterized Nomo, like they would not let you get away with anything such as that. So
I don't think any of those fiction writers were leaving anybody anywhere. We were leaving with them when they got finished. But what I loved was that the space honored every writer, every genre. And, there were people like Jarvis who wrote across genres. So sure, he was bringing many of the columns and blessing us with getting to hear the ideas, but I'm sure also using that to hone and refine what he would finally use if the time allowed. But he was also bringing poetry. Marion was bringing longer pieces, but she was also bringing poetry. So it was great in that way. It was diverse in that way.
yeah, and as for the people who were there, I think Baraka was before I was there. I do remember Toy Derricat. I do remember the brief time we had Terrence Hayes, who was a regular attendee when he was in New Orleans. Major Jackson, I think, was also in and out intermittently. And like you said, there were opportunities that you wouldn't know were going to be opportunities until you arrived on that particular evening. I see Marion with a question about how did my participation in NOMO, did it impede or help me with deadlines. I can understand the question. It didn't really impede anything. It was just, for me, it was that opportunity every week to be the most imaginative that I could be, and just learning and thinking about words and literature anew in a different way than would be expected of journalism was never anything less than helpful. So thanks for that question, Marian.
Jarvis, you were also a member of, became a member of Covey Academy during the time you were with the workshop. So you had the experience of working with a national organization focused on Black writers and had a particular slant. Toy Derricott was one of the founders.
Yes, with Cornelius Eady. Yes.
Cornelius Eady. They founded, but Toy was when she was a visitor at Xavier University, as was
Yes.
Terrence and Major. Terrence and Major were on the staff for a while, English department, and
Yes.
Toy was a visiting scholar. I forget the exact designation, but
Yeah.
you were part of that process where we had various people, and I'm not being revealing to say that I wasn't even on their levels. I mean, in fact, I don't care about the academic approach, but I do care about the people whom I work with. And at the workshop, we had people who had an academic approach, so that meant I had to care about them and care about what they were interested in. Whether I personally was or not had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
All of us have our personal inclinations. I'll just put it that way. But that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what we do as writers. And
Yeah. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You.
Well, I was going to say that what I don't know how much the quote unquote academic poets, some of whom you just mentioned, value the workshop. That's left for them to say. But what I do think is indisputable is that you were not singular in your reading. Like, you read widely and you read just about everybody. And so I think that you were the best type of person to respond to whatever they were writing, because you were as broad in your reading as you were. One of the things that really, really jumped out at me about the workshop is that whenever we would mention something, refer to something, or have a discussion, you could almost always say, look over there on that bookshelf at the very bottom. I see you nodding, Ayo, and get that particular book. It's like, wow, you got that too? And then bringing to the table your experience as a journalist, your experience in magazine and magazine publishing, your deep well of musical, you're an encyclopedia of music, right? And so it was always this kind of, is there anything that Kalamu doesn't know about? Or is there anything that Kalamu hasn't written about? And so, I started at NOMO, and then I went to Cave Canem. And, I would say that both people in both groups are really committed to the craft and really committed to making their art shine. And I'm not the only one who had a foot in both of those worlds. I know that the Jericho Brown did as well. And I think there are a couple of others who did both. I think what really, really distinguishes the two groups is the real focus in NOMO on the Black aesthetic and however you define that. And we were not all obviously in lockstep with one another as to what that was or is. But NOMO would challenge not only the way that you wrote something, but ask you, what was your thinking? What was your philosophy? What was your belief system behind that? And that is not the type of workshop that I had ever participated in before. And I can say I haven't really participated in it since, where our questions weren't just, oh, well, maybe you need a transitive verb there as opposed to an intransitive one, or, what do you think about this particular word choice? But what is your thinking? And it's kind of really popular to use the word decolonize as a verb this day, decolonize this and decolonize that. But I really think that No More Literary Society pushed all of us to decolonize our thinking and our writing, and not to fall into tropes that weren't ours, not to fall into tropes that were harmful or negative, and to really kind of break free of some of the ideas that we were carrying unawares, and challenging them in new ways. I see Ayo nodding a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Ayo, you were. What did you think of when we introduced the concept that the workshop once a month would have to do a public reading? I didn't care what you read. You could have read a poem you wrote. You could have read a short story you wrote. You could get up there and just riff. It didn't matter. But every month we would go over to Community Book Center at the podium. You stand up there in front of an audience, and you would invite people to come, along with the workshop.
Well, it was very familiar for me for a couple of reasons. One, because I came up in the church, and so what it means to be in front of people, speaking, that's, you better be good at that.
Take your time, baby, but go ahead and do it, right?
That's correct. But also because that's where the brothers found me, over at UNO by myself. Nadir and Maria were at Suno, and Sadi was doing, I think, some programming over at Xavier, and I don't know, maybe in the sorority we were pulling together an event, but I ended up somehow being invited to an event that had people from different schools. And I had just been dabbling in writing poetry, and was a part of a collective with them. And so the poetry readings, poetry sets and all of that, that's what we had been doing. And the workshop was an opportunity to hone the work in a new way, in preparation for just doing that post edit, not just from the writing as you had been inspired to initially create. So that's when draft and version became a thing in NOMO. and I probably shouldn't just delete things. I should keep every version so I can see, what was there, or maybe the part of the poem that I'm gonna take out here gets used in something else. But I realize I'm talking a whole lot about NOMO, and I just really, really want to celebrate Jarvis's book, Jarvis's collection, just to encourage people to really dive into it, because it walks through our collective history in the same way we're talking about the collective experience of our workshop. This collection walks us through a history that we all lived together. And it can be a mirror for how we move through this new history that we're journeying through together.
Jarvis,
Well,
when we decided to do I Feel to Believe, I should say, we ended up with a title. And I'd just like people to understand that I Feel to Believe was a New Orleans saying that was chosen for a literary project. How in the world did we do that?
we were all over, we were back and forth for a number of times. And it was just one of those things where we had been discussing it for a while. We had another title chosen, as I remember it. But then that title didn't seem to work anymore. And I felt it was the right choice, but I was like, they're not going to really like this one, are they? And then I said, I Feel to Believe. And you were like, that's it. That's the title. And it says so much, really, because it is one of those phrases that I had never heard anywhere else before arriving in New Orleans or South Louisiana. One that I initially misunderstood as the person saying I failed to believe. And I'm like, why are they so excited about something they feel to believe?
Poor
Like,
Mississippi.
yeah.
Mississippi.
And so then I realized, I keep hearing this I Feel to Believe over and over again, and I'm realizing it's something that people, when you feel to believe something, you're really serious about it. And it is just really something that you're really, really passionate about. And honestly, I was thinking today how I think some of my columns began almost in a way that you even might imagine them as being travel writing. Like, I am like a foreigner to this new land, right? Learning the language and customs and culture of people who, though only like a few hundred miles from where I was born, seem to be from a different kind of world almost. And so I think I think you can see, and one of the board members of One Board New Orleans said it to me last month, that you can see me in this book becoming a New Orleanian. That's not where I began, but you see this trajectory of someone becoming that. And so given that, I Feel to Believe it's like the most perfect title, because I'm using the language of a place that was really foreign to me at first. And the title may strike some people as really foreign, but I would hope that once you have read through the book that you will see more and more and more why the title of the book is what it is.
Something I would also add to that is the feeling to believe, the connecting the head and heart to come to one's truest understanding, is a mark of New Orleans as keeping ancient traditions. So you don't have a complete understanding until you have understood not just intellectually, but also emotionally the thing that is being discussed or experienced.
Yeah, and New Orleans doesn't live with these kind of dualities that or dichotomies, I should say, that other places may have. It's a both and kind of city, And again, like the jazz funeral, I'm both sad and I'm happy simultaneously. I'm not picking an emotion right now. I'm dancing at my mama's funeral. Deal with that, and how that may look to you. But that kind of, as Ayo just said, and as we write in the explanation of the title in the book, it's a marriage of the heart and the head. to arrive and to feel that kind of passion of one's position.
Both of you come from the South, but from different parts of the South. And I would even say radically different parts of the South. Jarvis, you're from Mississippi, and Ayo, you're from Georgia. And I find it interesting that you all have a common love for this peculiar city called New Orleans. What drew you? What drew you in? It wasn't just a workshop, because you all were here. So, what drew you into this?
To the city?
Whatever
To
this.
I wasn't drawn at all at first to it, but it was one of those situations where I took the time to look around me and listen, and being a journalist was a really, really great benefit to me in that sense, because you have to go out. You can't stay in one little corner. And you also have to, by the very nature of the job, listen to people. And you can't get around that. And there are a few things in life more rewarding than listening to people in New Orleans, because it is you're gonna laugh, you may cry, but you will get a story, and it will be told in this distinctly musical, dramatic kind of way that, if your heart is open to it, will just be the most wonderful thing. I will never forget, while living in Treme, which is right around from the workshop, I had this ill-fated decision that I was going to run to City Park and run back one morning. I was completely out of shape. It did not work out for me well at all. And so I was walking back incredibly sore, and this man sidles up alongside me and he says, "People say I talk too much, but I'm going to keep talking just as long as anybody is listening." And I have never felt like more trapped outside. I'm sore, so I can't pick up my pace. I'm walking gingerly and in pain. And he's telling me this incredible tale of how he had been in the French Quarter, and all he had was one little drink and got swooped up by the NOPD. So the whole story is his weekend experience at Orleans Parish Prison. And it's like, I didn't go seeking out this story. I didn't ask him about where he had been the last 3 days, but I get this epic tale. And it was just like, this is the city. Like, this is New Orleans, like, crystallized and in its essence. And so, like, how could you not love a place like that? One of the columns in the book is about running a very simple errand at City Hall, and just getting swooped up into this conversation about preachers in the city, and it was just incredible just to experience that kind of storytelling, that kind of natural storytelling, and that gift that New Orleanians have for language. It was impossible for me not to fall in love. I don't know about Ayo's experience or why she fell in love with New Orleans, so I'd love to hear it though.
Oh, wow. I came of age here. I've been here all of my adult life. And I would say the biggest thing is that this is a place where I got to become and be a natural Black woman in every corner of my life. And there was a supportive community for me professionally, on my spiritual path, socially. I just got to become and be myself here. So,
All of y'all have presented sanitized versions. And I'll take us back to the workshop day. Jarvis, tell us about that woman you were following. And Keisha, I know you was hooked up with somebody over there. And when we had that meeting at, not a meeting, when we first met at Xavier University, and
Yes.
you showed me, your friend showed me your work. You didn't even show it to me. Your friend showed me your work and asked me what I thought about it. And I said it was
writing.
What did I say?
You said it was writing.
That's right.
I got stuck because I'm not sure that I remember that exactly the same way, but it's okay.
That's so diplomatic.
I just can't imagine myself being, not that I didn't have emotions, but being so taken by my emotions that I could not be the person to step up and say, here is. Now, certainly, I remember being encouraged. I do remember that. But in my version of the story, I'm the person who presents it to you. My writing. He didn't even say, I said, here's my poetry. No, it didn't even earn a qualification as poetry. It was
no kind of genre.
Yes.
It was writing. And that woman, Jarvis?
Yes,
Don't go mute on us.
I'm trying to figure what you're asking me. Listen, Kalamu, for whatever reason, is fixated on the fact that.
Well, I'll chime in and say that what I remember about the birth of this collection was really getting a call from Kelly saying, I really feel like, there's something he needs to say in a book. I mean, he's done all this writing. And, I just remember reaching out to Jarvis one night. I was actually out at UNO and I sent a text message and wasn't expecting a response. And you responded. And as I recall, you were saying, well, I'm not sure that I'm up for really writing anything new. I said, well, who said you had to write anything new? There's, this doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be a struggle. This really could just be a pulling together of the gifts that you've already given us. So I know you sat with it for a while, what approach you would want.
I did, and I was kind of resistant to it. And I thank you for giving me an excuse to mention Kelly, my wife, and this, a lot of the credit, I would say 95% of the credit for this book actually existing goes to her, because it was really her idea that she saw the value in it when I was a little unsure that it was a good project to pursue. So thank you, Kelly, for that push and for working behind the scenes, and sometimes without me even knowing, to talk to Ayo and Kalamu and Abram.
Oh, did I just tell a secret?
No, not a secret.
That would not be unusual.
No, it's not a secret at all. But yeah, I mean, it and I guess it is me being a little bit humble is not the word, but not knowing how people would respond, or knowing if people wanted this particular project. I'm glad that the response has been so positive for it, because the difference between writing a column and I think writing so many other things is that there is this certain kind of, I'm obviously writing this in the moment, right? So this might not necessarily apply next week. Things might have changed by next week, and things might be different next month. And so there is a certain kind of in the moment nature. It's news. It's the news industry. And so I was pleasantly surprised after Kelly's gentle pushing and you all's request that I could go back and find columns that I thought that people would still be interested in reading and still feel as if it was worthy of their time and attention. And so I'm grateful for that, for the opportunity to publish, and grateful that One Book New Orleans, One Book One New Orleans has chosen this because I had just wanted to be read. You know, I think that's what kind of, that was a commonality that everybody had in NOMO, but I think it's a commonality that everybody who writes has in general. Like, I want you to read this and to give me your attention long enough to see if, you know, this is worth your time. And so the fact that so many people did that, and the fact that with this project, so many people will be continuing to do that is really, really, it's something I've never taken for granted. And the one thing I can say to the mission that was mentioned earlier about the high rates of functional illiteracy in New Orleans, and the fact that the book will be used in literacy programs and adult literacy programs. One of the things that really impressed me about people in New Orleans in general was there was no hierarchy that I could tell between people who read the paper and people who did not. And that was such a beautiful, beautiful thing that when I finally realized that I'm not writing for upper crust people. You know, I'm not writing for this different kind of strata of people by writing for the Times-Picayune, that I'm writing for the people in the C-suites, the people on the back of garbage trucks, the people bussing tables, the people who are teachers, you know, all walks of life. And I would hear from so many people of various experiences and backgrounds. And it really made me see that there was this kind of democratizing effect that the newspaper itself and the columns had, that it was one of those things that I wrote it in a way that everybody would have access to, right? That was one of the things that I think I really got from NOMO. There were so many workshops, not so many, I hadn't done that many, but previous workshops I'd been in, I got the sense that people really prized inaccessibility. You know, the harder my thing is to understand, the better that thing is. So if you struggle with understanding my poem, that means that I'm really great and that you're not so smart. And I think one of the things that NOMO really emphasized was that you can speak to the people in a way that's intelligent, but that it's not exclusionary. And so that emphasis on the workshop of meeting people where they were is really, I think, evident in these columns that are in the book.
I want to add, before we get to the questions, because there are people who are chomping at the bit to ask questions, and I want to get out of the way of that. But I just wanted to add, the reason I asked you all about Jarvis, about that woman, and Ayo, about, not to embarrass you, about the situation at Xavier when your writings were first presented, is because I don't think that any writing worth anything is ever going to come out of separating our heads from the rest of our being. That is not just about what you think. And that's why the title is so important. I feel to believe.
Yeah.
It's really about who we are. And part of who we are are the people with whom we associate on an intimate level. I'm not, I've never been interested to know what you did in your bedroom or anything else like that. That was not my interest. But at the same time, I understood that even if we don't own a house, even if we don't, if we sleep in our cars, there is still something social in our lives that makes us be us, whoever that
Yeah.
us may be.
Kalamu,
Yeah.
in my head, I'm hearing we are guilty of forgetting who we are.
Yeah,
We are guilty of forgetting who we are, and a lot of um, the work that we did was to create the space in which um, those who had a literary voice could write the canon of who we were at that time, who we got to be, who we aspired to be, who we came from. And so, Jarvis certainly is among those writers who brought a, a care and a craft to documenting who we came from, who we were being, and who we aspired to be.
Yeah, and I want to say two things before we take questions. One of the reasons this book exists, the book was conceptualized, I think, in 2018, 2019, and I didn't know at that particular point that my tenure at the Times-Picayune was soon going to end. That it was right around the corner, actually. Um, and so this is an opportunity, I think, for people to maybe relive some of those moments of sitting at the kitchen table and reading the column, or sitting on the bus or the streetcar stop with it. But to the point about who we were and reminding us of who we were, yeah, I mean that's really what I am hoping that these particular columns as a whole do. It is so easy to get New Orleans wrong. It is so easy to parachute in and think that you understand the city. And especially in the time around Hurricane Katrina, there was so much written about New Orleans that can only rightly be described as defamatory, right? It was just that awful and that dismissive of the humanity of the people who call this place home. And so, to refer to the point of me becoming a New Orleanian, that was kind of like a real watershed moment of, pardon the pun, if it sounds like one, I don't mean it to be, me becoming a New Orleanian. That I am 8 years into this city and the worst thing has happened to it. And there are people who have no familiarity with the city daring to describe it and daring to talk about it and defame it and dismiss the people as not being smart or not being moral or not being worthy of the compassion that is due human beings. And a defensiveness kicks in, like, wait, I know these people. I am these people at this point. And so the book, I hope, is just a love song to New Orleans, and people receive it as such, but also a document about what it was like to be here and what it means to actually love this place with all of its many, many flaws, with all of this violence and its poverty and its sorrow, that there is still love there that connects people and here are the reasons why. This is why we feel to believe that this is the place to be.
Part of it is that, as you point out about your accompaniment, as you were laboring from trying to run, New Orleans people, what's distinctive, one of the things that's distinctive about the city is you can strike up a conversation with anyone at any time. And it could be any walk of life. You could be going to City Hall. You could be at a bus stop. You could be going to Walgreens to pick up some cough syrup or something. And the person you standing in line behind turn around and say to you, "Look at that rain out there." And all you can say is, "Well, yeah, right."
Yeah.
Before you know it, you're talking about your wife, your husband, your spouse, your children, or whatever.
Yeah. My favorite example of that phenomenon is being in a brake tag line. Now, again, I'm in a brake tag line, so I am in my car in a line of people lined up to get their brake tags, and somehow there's a conversation struck up. The man in front gets out to see if his brake lights are working. And why not come talk to me after that? He just saunters over and strikes up a conversation. And I'm like, how am I in my car in a brake tag line and have been pulled into a conversation by someone who's telling me about how he thinks the previous owner has a boat because it's tugging a little too far to right and such and such. And he ended by telling me, don't drink too much because his cousin got diabetes that way. I was like, okay, thank you. Like, it was like those kinds of conversations that you cannot avoid in New Orleans. And it is a city that does not allow you really to be a stranger. Like, if you're living in a neighborhood in New Orleans, it's not one of these places where you're not really going to know your neighbors in this kind of what's become like this kind of stereotypical American belief. Oh, they live over there, but I never see them and don't know who they are, don't talk to them. There are neighborhoods in New Orleans where they make sure that you know who they are, and they're going to make sure they know as much about your business as they can possibly know. And so those are types of conversations that just can't be avoided in the city. And it's through those conversations really that so many column ideas came.
I think we have questions. Megan, somebody?
I think we have some here. I will look to see if there are some that I see.
One says, "I love how you spoke of this need to read about a loud community. How different are music and writing, or are they really the same thing?"
The thing I love about that question is that in listening to the writing, you get to hear the literary devices of sound, and you get to hear who's a master and who's working something out. And so they are, I'll say they're closer than cousins.
Yeah, they're really tightly related. Maybe siblings. And there's a real musicality, I think, that Nomo valued in writing. And one of the things that Kalamu often stressed is that most of us know more words than we know how to pronounce. And so the importance of reading your work out loud was, in one part, is this really, do you even know this word really? Do you know how this word sounds? And because how a word sounds can be almost, if not equally important as to the meaning of that word. And so reading it out loud was a way of really testing it in a way. It's putting it through another test. There are there are some poems out there and some other works of literature out there that really count as, models for whatever genre they are. And sometimes either they're not particularly written for the oral sensation that they may provide, or sometimes the person who wrote them is just a horrible reader. But one of the things that we really stressed and emphasized was how does this sound? How does it come across? How pleasing is it to the ear when it is read out loud? And I think that's something that far too much writing has gotten away from. It's not just a one-dimensional thing of sight.
Now, quiet as it's kept, one of the things Jarvis was celebrated for in workshop was his blues poetry. And then there are folks like Peter Muhammad and Chris Williams, for whom, it is the same. Their writing, their rap, their music, it's all the same thing. And then there are folks for whom it's not as apparent, even though the attention to craft is just as deep. So thanks for that question, Chairman.
Yeah, I wanted to just to Io's point, I wanted to read a just a snippet of a column that kind of makes that point about the music. Of course, I'm going to have a trouble finding it right now.
Take your time. Take your time.
But thank you, Kalamu, for giving me the church greeting there. But it was about the demolition of my house that I owned.
Mm-hmm.
And I really deliberately leaned on my blues poetry and the way that I had done that. Okay, finally, it took me that long trying to talk and read at the same time to finally get it. So the column appeared January 29, 2010. Emptiness dwells where home once stood. And it begins with a quote from a blues song. Looked like 10,000 people were standing around the burying ground. I didn't know I loved her till they let her down. And that's Son House from Death Letter Blues.
Yeah.
So this is the first two paragraphs of that column. They knocked down my house Saturday. My first house, my only house, the 3-bedroom purchase that symbolized for me my transition from quasi-adult to the real thing. Saturday, they knocked it down. And so I was going for that same repetition, and I think I do it. They knocked down my house Saturday, my first house, my only house. And then the paragraph ends, Saturday, they knocked it down. So I was very, very deliberate. And first of all, quoting lyrics from the blues, and then writing that opening paragraph in a way that would also be an echo of the blues. And again, that's not something I think I would have even had the mind to do if I hadn't been in NOMO so often and talking about forms and talking specifically about the blues form. But yeah, I think there is, I certainly tried to write the columns with the sound of them in mind. And I won't be mad if you find them musical in some kind of way.
I would say that one of the deliberate aspects of what I tried to do as a workshop leader was to move people away from thinking that writing was purely literary, in the sense that writing is not just those words on the page. And that as a writer, you pay attention to what it sounds like also. because what sound carries sensibility, sound carries meaning. And what we sound like is often more important than what we say. So we may say, like, I can say I like you.
I
But
like
it doesn't sound like I like you.
I like you. Why
I
you
don't
say that? I like you.
Yeah.
So here's a great question from Joshua. When Jarvis, when you wrote titles like "Did you care that New Orleans teachers were fired?" or "New Orleans City Council says hush all that noise," how did you prepare for the response they might evoke? How did you navigate the relationship between keeping it real versus potential backlash?
Thank you, Joshua. That is a great question. I really have had the benefit of surrounding myself by some really courageous people in my life, Kalamu being one of them. Uh, look up Kalamu's history if you don't know exactly what I'm referring to or why I don't hesitate on calling him courageous. Um, People in my family who literally put their bodies on the line for the cause they were devoted to. People like Jerome Big Duck Smith or Dodie Simmons or so many of the other people in New Orleans who faced physical assault and attacks for taking a stand. It always made me feel like the least I could do, and I do mean almost the least I could do, was be able to put my thoughts into words. And so, but being said, was it scary at times? Yes, but I tried to consistently draw some inspiration from the courage that I saw from others. And most times the dread that I felt of how people might respond never lived up to the actual feeling after they said whatever they said or called me any sort of name. So, but I think courage is a practice. Like I don't think it's something that necessarily comes naturally to a lot of people. And I think that for me personally, I have had to draw inspiration and courage from so many other people. Um, but and there were times when I knew, okay, this is going to be the reaction. So be it. Sometimes you just have to have that kind of attitude. At the same time, and this is one of the reasons that the book exists. My wife and I discussed, what might you want to leave behind to our daughter? So there were many topics that I asked myself, if my daughter has a question about where I stood on a particular position or thing, will I have anything to say to her? Will I be able to say that I took this position? Will I be able to say I was too scared to take a position on that? And so thinking about people around me who I considered courageous, but also B, like I want my daughter to think of me as having some type of courage. And so that was its own kind of inspiration that I want to show that, hey, you can take this position and it's going to be okay. But thank you, Joshua.
And we have this one last question that, yes, that they sent me back to find. Did the fact that all three of us have some church in our background, what or how did that inform our writing and so many Black writers who share that lodestar?
It's kind of inseparable for me in many ways. Like I don't know what my life would be like without the Easter speeches and the Black History programs where I had to learn, to say Langston Hughes, hold fast to dreams. Somebody was just mentioning that a few years ago. One of my mother's former students, like, I remember you were like 5, 6 years old and you were reciting Langston Hughes. And like I said, I'm sure it was for a Black History program at the church, right? So to Ayo's point earlier, there's a religious training, yes. There's a religious dogma or indoctrination or education or advancement or whatever you want to call it. But there is also, in that same institution, the training for how you present yourself to the world, learning how to stand straight and to take your time, baby, and not to give up when you may be a little flustered or are feeling a little nervous about things. But again, it's the music, it's the language, it's the drama, it's the joy, it's the sorrow. I mean, it's all there. So if you are a Black writer, at least from the American South, where the Black church is such an cultural institution, I don't think that you can help but be influenced by it. You may be running to it, you may be running away from it, you may be doing something alternate, but I think it has to be reckoned with in some kind of way, for me at least.
And I'm going to say I agree with Jarvis's perspective, and it's the Africa, it's the oral tradition, because the brother in the barbershop or at the bus stop or wherever you find our people who are running it down, and it has no relationship to church, but they are standing in full confidence, full clarity, running it down like a Just Be Simple rundown from Langston Hughes.
Yes.
And as we travel, we see our people everywhere. Running it down is a part of what we do. We stand confidently in those things that we feel to believe. And we will share as much intellect, mother wit, street wisdom, and mixed with emotion, like our authentic emotion, as it takes to get the point across. That is what Black people do.
It's interesting. I've never defined myself by the church. I left the church when I was 14, 15 years old. But I have a brief story I will tell. My grandfather was on both sides, but on my mother's side, my grandfather was a Baptist preacher. Had two churches, one Greater Liberty Baptist Church, 1230 Desire Street, and another in Violet, Louisiana, down by St. Bernard Parish. I came up out of the Army in '68, just ready to get deep into Black power and all that kind of stuff. I was out at Suno. We took over the school, literally took over the school, took down the American flag, put up the Black flag of liberation, dared anybody to come and deal with it. Seriously, I mean, we put the dean, Emmett Bashful. He was sitting behind his desk. He refused to leave. We put him out by literally picking up the chair he was in and wheeling it and taking it outside and pushing him out the door and locking the door behind him.
This, folks, is the courage I was referring to earlier.
And at one of the sessions out at Suno, my grandfather came, and Reverend Copeland rose to speak at that program. I was sitting all the way in the back with one of my compadres, And my grandfather got up to speak and he started to say something. I wasn't paying too much attention because I didn't care what it didn't matter to us what anybody said. We were going to do what we were going to do. And suddenly I could see him struggling for words. And then he fell to the floor. And long story short, well, short story brief, really, he died that night at the hospital. And that's when it became apparent to me that what we did, whatever it was that we decided to do, was more momentous than just a thought. That what we were doing affects people in ways that are far beyond just intellectual. And after that, I became really much more serious. My grandfather, with whom I lived when my father was in the army, Second World War and the Korean conflict. My grandfather died that night. And when he died, the whole family looked at me because the reason he was there was because we were doing these demonstrations out at Southern. That was the only reason he was out there at that time. And it in a way that no intellectualizing can hit you, it taught me a lesson that whatever we do has serious repercussion, particularly for the people who are close to us. You know, we get so full of ourselves, we sometimes don't think about how we think, how what we say, how what we do affects our grandparents, affects our parents, affects our children. But that was a lesson for me. It didn't stop me from doing what I thought needed to be done, but it certainly instructed me that whatever you do, there's an effect that it has on someone else, whatever it is you do. And you might as well be serious about what you say and do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Can
Thank
I
you.
can I
Gorgeous.
end with just, I think our time is ending. Can I just read one passage?
Sure.
If
Yeah.
And Jarvis, just before you do that, can I just point people, just in the spirit of Nomo, to a couple of titles that I think would be instructive. Carolyn Fowler's Black Arts and Black Aesthetics, and Dr. Jerry Ward's Trouble the Water.
Yes, to both of those. This is just a small excerpt of what you will find in the book. This column was written July 9th, 2014, and it was in response to the Ma'afa celebration that happens annually in Congo Square, a celebration and commemoration and a memory exercise that's staged by Ashe Cultural Arts Center in New Orleans. While sitting on the sunlit cobblestones of Congo Square on Saturday morning, I couldn't help but wonder what gatherings at that sacred space must have looked like, must have sounded like, must have felt like for long ago captives who looked like me. Were those who had been held in the bellies of slave ships thankful that they had survived a torturous journey across the Atlantic Ocean? Or were they envious of those who died and were fed to the sharks? Were they bewildered and confused by the different African languages competing for attention at this square? Or were they able to derive some small comfort that those languages sounded more like home than the European languages their oppressors were forcing into their mouths? What messages would the enslaved have sent to their loved ones in their villages back home? If they could have spoken to future generations, what would they have said? So much is unknown. Languages, villages, religion, culture, occupations, social status. The people gathered at Congo Square Saturday morning were there out of respect. What we do know, millions died in the Middle Passage, and even those who survived, may have wished they hadn't. The Swahili word used to describe the Middle Passage and the enslavement of Africans is ma'afa, meaning great tragedy. We know that captives were worked unmercifully, even till death. We know that they were flogged and branded and raped and forcibly bred. But in addition to all the horrible things we do know, there's a sorrow that comes from all the things we don't. Origins, genealogy, names.
Do we have the oh, there you are, Megan.
Hi. Thank you so
Yeah, go
much.
ahead.
Thank you so much for all of that. Baba Kalamu, Jarvis, my heart and my mind are so full. I'll be revisiting this conversation over and over and over again. And I hope everyone watching will do the same, especially if you miss some. It will live on Facebook and YouTube, so you can go back and visit it as much as you want for the foreseeable future. So thank you. And thank you, Baba Kalamu, especially for using the phrase any walk of life, because that's something we talk about at One Book, One New Orleans so much. We want readers from any walk of life to come together around a book and share their experiences with it and have everyone's point of view be valued and validated. So thank you for uplifting that phrase. And we welcome everyone who is watching tonight to continue the journey with us through the year with I Feel to Believe. Stay tuned to our Facebook, our YouTube, our newsletter, our Eventbrite page. You can find us pretty much all over the place. And we'll let you know what's coming up next. Hopefully we'll have some things in person. But until then, we will be online and you can see us and hear us from the comfort of your home. Thank you once again for a wonderful evening, all of you in the audience and on this screen right now. I appreciate you so much.